Hello and welcome to this week's journey on the road less traveled with Gary L. and Gigi's Boo on RealLibertyMedia.com, RLM Radio. Hello, Gigi's Boo. How you doing?
Fine as frog hair.
Fine as frog hair. Glad to see everyone here. You already on? What? Well, we're on now.
We're here now, Graham.
I don't know.
Can you hear us?
I don't know what's going on out there. It's hard to tell what it is. Hillary probably in the middle of something, but her and Janet Reno.
No, not her and Graham. No, you knew that.
No, her Janet Reno, she running around somewhere. Anyhow, I'm glad everyone's here, and I don't know what the hell is going on with this audio. It's driving me crazy. It keeps wanting to jump around and peek out and all kinds of stuff. I don't know. I went to a headset because some of the powered speakers for the computer was interfering with the Yeti microphone and all kinds of stuff, so switched over to headset. Now, I don't know what's going on, geez. But we just try to do the best we can with
all we can do.
With the immense budget that we have. Speaking of budgets, I mean, I know there are a whole lot of things going on out there with Facebook and Farcebook, or whatever you want to call it. And you have all these other social platforms now starting to come up, which is natural, a real, true, free market. That's a natural thing. You see all these new websites coming up. There are a lot of them to choose from. And the problem is there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers, but there's some of us that really have some preferences. And we like to, of course, put them out there. The ones that we like to highly recommend. And Freedom's Network, freedomsnetwork.com, is one that we highly recommend. I mean, it's very close to us because it's run by a lot of the people that we're close with. So, long story short, Freedom's Network is running into a real financial problem. Of course, they don't take any advertising. They don't sell your personal data like some other places that we can think of. And they don't make any money off the posts that you put up. But at the same time, they don't censor what you have to say either. They're not subject to the whims of the advertisers and what messages they want to spin out there, or the CEOs and all these other not-to-be-mentioned forces that seem to like to want to control the media and everything else. But check out Freedom's Network. I mean, they have a donation button on their homepage. You don't even have to join. If you're one of those altruistic souls who like to see a straight-up competition in the marketplace as far as quality social networks are concerned, then jump in there and give them a little money. I mean, it costs $360 a year, apparently, from what I understand, to keep Freedom's Network on the air, or on the web, I guess. And, that's not a lot. I'm sure there are probably maybe 360 people out there listening. Well, that's like $1 a piece. I mean, not that you can really easily send a PayPal for $1. I mean, I don't know. They cost you some money to do that. So maybe $2, $2 to make up for one of the 360 people who don't remember. But, give them a look and see. Grimner tells me in the chat room, and we'll talk about chat room in a minute, that we have an extra month, so they're good until May 23rd. It's a deadline. It's a drop-dead date of May 23rd, literally drop-dead date, because if they don't make the payment by May 23rd, freedomsnetwork.com will go dark, will be unreachable. And that's kind of a terrible statement to have to make in this world of free choice and all these complaints that we hear about. Facebook, blah, we don't like, they censor us, they sell our data. They're fined by European Union countries for millions and millions of euros for doing that very thing. And their stock plummets, but everybody just sits back and complains. Well, you have actual alternatives. You can actually make choices like freedomsnetwork.com. So give them a look. Take a look at it. Sign up. It doesn't cost a thing. You can just sign up and look around. And if you like it, Send them a couple of dollars. Send them $5. Send them $1,000. Huh? For you guys out there who got the deep pockets. I don't know how many who listen to this show have those deep pockets, except for the ones who are the government monitors. But that's okay. They think they have deep pockets, but they're just waiting their turn. They have their heads on the chopping block when they become expendable. We all know how that works. Anyway, take a look. We appreciate it. Now, let's talk about where we are. We're talking about reallibertymedia.com. It's the same situation, you guys. And I know Real Liberty Media, I mean, we don't have to wait until the last minute. Real Liberty Media has a budget as well. I don't know exactly what that is, and it really doesn't matter because it's been around for over 10 years now. 10 years. And mostly through the good offices of Grim Neer. Grim Neer, who is the webmaster, is also the guy who runs the IRC chat that we can freely use and have been, and a lot of people have been using for a very long time, and 8 years at least for us. And so you have the IRC chat that you can find at reallibertymedia.com, and that's the home. That's the home of the road less the road less traveled. I'm getting tongue-tied, but you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. I know you're going to sleep. I can't have it. Anyway.
You're silly.
Anyway, you got reallibertymedia.com. It's a home of the road less traveled. And like I say, they could use a little love as well. They actually do Bitcoin. All kinds of different currencies are acceptable at reallibertymedia.com. So give them a look as well and join the chat room. You can join the chat room right on the home page, right on the front page. Or if you're one of those technically savvy people that have a standalone IRC application, there are ways of doing that as well that we can talk about offline. Anyhow, that's about it for that. Gigi's Boo, what have you been up to?
The same old. Going to the gym.
Yeah. Tell us about the gym. Gigi's Boo joined up to the gym. She's gonna be
pretty cool place.
She's gonna be Arnold Schwarzenegger.
No, I'm not. Pretty cool place. It was really nice to meet the people there. They're very nice people, and I know I'm gonna enjoy it. I did a little bit of a workout, but not much. And other than that, piddling around with their silly dog.
Well, you got to work your way up to that. That gym stuff. You just can't jump right in and start breaking all the equipment. True. Your body will break before the equipment does. Trust me.
Already feels like it after 2 days.
Yeah, and of course, you've changed your diet. That's been changed for a little while now. That's impressive. And just recently, I got a birthday / Father's Day present from Gigi's Boo. You want to tell people about that?
Well, Gary and I have been having these discussions of how people dress now than what they did in yesteryear. Let's just say the 30s, 40s, and even as late as the 50s. I think we saw more of a revolution take place in the 60s. Women dressed very, very feminine, and men were very classy. And we talked about that, and I always told Gary, and he really looked good in a suit, a tie, an overcoat, and I'd like to see him in a fedora hat. And so he wanted one. I got him a very nice fedora hat from this great place out of Texas. We're going to plug them a little bit. They're on eBay. Very nice. And if he could drop a picture, and it's my favorite picture of him dressed up, he could drop maybe a link so you could see.
Don't know that I have a link available for that. But anyway, it's a black.
He looks really good in that. He puts me in the mind of he says he looks like a gangster. I don't think he looks like a gangster. I think he just looks like a real cultured Southern gentleman.
Yeah, it's a black fedora. I mean, either that or I look like a Hasidic Jew. But no,
you don't either. Stop that.
But no, it's a very, very nice Stetson, and thank you very much, Gigi's Boo, for that. And it came from an eBay seller by the name of Monteville Cowboys in Texas. And not to be confused with Cowboy Tech, who's in the chat room. We have Monteville Cowboy, and he's been on eBay since August of 2002. And I have to admit that she ordered it, and it got here like in no time, and very
prestigious looking, very, very pristine condition.
Extremely well packaged, and a whole lot of care went into it, and so you don't see that every day with online sellers. Along the same line, for warm weather, now this is the one Gigi's Boo got me is a wool felt. Okay, so it's like more, and being black and so forth is more like for a fall winter kind of look. So for summertime, one likes to have a nice straw hat. And I found also another eBay seller, and I was really impressed with this one too, because they even went as far to send a thank you card. It's personalized, not one of those printed jobs, but handwritten, personalized thank you card, with having bought the straw hat and got it on a real deal, thanks to Martha over there at Wind River Boutique is the name of that eBay seller. Later on, I'll drop some links. I'll probably put them in the blogcaster for anybody who's interested in those sorts of things, like hats. And in the case of Wind River Boutique, it's pretty much what you'd expect. It looks a little bit like maybe a consignment store of sorts. I'm not sure about that. And so they've been around since 2015. And they both have excellent ratings. So we're getting nothing in return for this, just for sake of full disclosure. We like to plug people when they do a good job, and they actually both did a really good job on this. And Gigi's Boo, I think you got a birthday present, because you actually do have a birthday coming up here very shortly.
I sure did. I got a wonderful popcorn popper that you pop your popcorn on the top of the stove, and it has a turner on it that you can turn, and it came, and I'm thrilled to death over that. Again, I'm not one that gets too enthralled over anything that blings unless it's costume jewelry. I very, very much look forward to using that because I love popcorn.
Yeah, it's called a Whirly Pop. And
Whirly Pop.
And it's made by I believe the Great Northern Popcorn Company or something to that effect. They've been around for a long time, and they're available on Walmart.com, and pretty good deal too. So, if you're interested in eating healthy popcorn instead of that nasty microwave crap, I can't believe anybody even eats anything in a microwave, but nonetheless, some people still got to throw that bag of popcorn in the microwave and trade their health for a little bit of convenience, I suppose. But the old Whirly Pop, you put it on top of the stove, and a little peanut oil and popcorn, and you can season it however you like without having to add all the nasty stuff to it. Anyhow.
That's true.
Yeah, so there we go. There's all our plugs, I think, for this week. Sound like a commercial station, but we're not, we promise. Okay, Gigi's Boo, you have come up with an amazing discovery that you nor I, and I suspect very few others, have ever heard of. And you want to talk a little bit about that?
I saw a movie sometime back that involved a French Canadian who was cultish, and he had a lot of women living with him and children, and he did horrific things to these people in this movie. And to the children were removed from their home. And I couldn't believe it when I was just researching some things that I wanted to do tonight, maybe. And I came across, and it said, Canadian cult leader believed in polygamy, black magic, and murder. And when I tell you the story of this guy, I recommend that you watch the movie. It's called, what was it, Gary?
The movie is called Deadly Messiah.
Deadly Messiah. I was wanting to say Strangling Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a very scary movie when you watched it. He had a lot of mind control. He was really good at what he did. And these women loved him. They lived a very free and open lifestyle. I'm going to give you a little history on this guy. His name was Rock Theriot. And you know, the Canadians have always had a reputation for being incredibly polite and well-mannered. And you never expect a violent cult leader like this man to come out of a country that prides itself on kindness, acceptance, and inclusion. They say that he was one of the most sadistic cult leaders who murdered their followers despite claiming to be a man of God. You know, they all get that God in there, and God's supposed to have talked to them and everything. He was known to be incredibly charismatic. He was a French Canadian, had a great passion for religion, and he was someone who could draw you in like a snake oil salesman, is the way they described him. In 1977, he was able to charm his way into creating a commune of multiple wives and many children in Burnt River, Ontario, Canada. He had convinced his followers he was a prophet, claiming God told him followers were not doing as he said, he was to punish them. So in a Canadian wilderness, he subjected his followers to unspeakable violence and abuse, losing a limb and participating in lewd acts with children. That was not out of the ordinary for any of these members. He named the cult Anthill Kids. Despite his atrocious behavior and the constant threat of losing life or limb, his members stayed with him. In 1999, the sadistic cult was finally brought to an end. The facts about this man and his cult are really graphic. He started his religious thing with the Seventh-day Adventist. He converted from Catholic to Seventh-day Adventist, and he quickly became an integral part of the church. Now, the Seventh-day Adventists commended him for his success in organizing seminars and selling both the religion and the anti-smoking treatments to potential new followers. It was during this time that Theriot realized how powerful his ability to charm and persuade others. He was eventually kicked out of the church for drinking and stealing money. By then, he had amassed a group of followers within the church and decided that this was the right time to lead them away from the mainstream. 1977, he, along with new followers, formed the society, just like I said, the Anthill Kids, a group where everybody could live equal as long as they listened to him. Eventually, he would lead his followers, most of them who were young women, out to the woods where the atrocities began. He fathered 26 children, several of whom were conceived while he was in prison the first time. In 1967, Theriot met his first wife, Francine Grenier, when she was 17 and he was 21. They had a fairly normal relationship for the first several years until he developed severe stomach pain. He was diagnosed with ulcers and he underwent surgery. The surgery, unfortunately, didn't go as planned, and Theriot developed what they call the dumping syndrome. A lot of you don't know what the dumping syndrome is. It says it can be vomiting, but a lot of it is diarrhea too. And it has a lot of pain involved. You have a lot of stomach pain. He tried to deal with pain, and so he started drinking. Eventually developed into an alcoholic. He cheated on Grenier with a new woman named Giselle, who would eventually become the number one wife within the cult. Later, she would tell Theriot that the other women in the cult were lonely and sad, and that fed his ego, of course, and he used it to his advantage and decided to marry every one of them. And out of those women, he produced 26 children. He became obsessed with playing doctor on his followers. After his ulcer surgery, he became obsessed with medicine and took any and every opportunity to perform surgery on his followers. Fingers, toes, teeth, hands, and arms were removed. He used his own tools like pliers, knives, blowtorches to conduct the operations. It wasn't until Gabrielle Laverly, one of his most loyal followers, broke free from the cult after enduring horrific physical and emotional abuse that the authorities were alerted. What she went through before notifying police is nothing short of a nightmare. He took out 8 of her teeth, broke a needle in her back, burned her genitalia, cut off one of her fingers and a breast, and chopped off part of her arm with a hunting knife. Now, in the movie, all these women just looked to him adoringly, and they were all sitting around the table, and he reached over and took this particular woman that I'm speaking of's hand across the table and ran his hand up and down her arm. And he reached up and he kissed her hand, and she was looking at him like, "You're the greatest thing in the whole wide world." And he laid it down, and he never broke his stare from her, and he stabbed her through the hand into the wooden table. One of the women in the movie fainted. Others gasped. The woman that he stabbed sit there and sweated. And all night long he sat and he watched her. She didn't scream out. She didn't make any moves. Nothing. And at daybreak, he removed the knife. And when he removed the knife, she screamed. He then, in the movie, he took a hatchet and cut her arm off, and she escaped from him. And while she was trying to escape, he had cut her a lot on the back. And she managed to get to the highway, and she managed to get down and get some help. I got off a little bit, but I wanted to tell you, when you get the movie, be prepared. It's really bad. They said that what he did to him was totally insane. He didn't only inflict abuse on them, but he also forced his followers to abuse each other. The worst came when a woman named Solange Beozalard, she told Theriot she had pain in her abdomen. He insisted on playing doctor and started with a punch to her stomach. He then gave her an olive oil enema, forced her on her back, cut open her stomach, ripped out her intestines, and shoved a tube down her throat, into which he blew air. He forced Lovely to stitch her up using sewing needle and thread. She died within hours, and Theriot, who thought himself to be a prophet, told his followers he would bring her back to life. He then drilled a hole into her skull and forced the male members of a cult to ejaculate into it. He became obsessed with her coming back to life and wore her rib bone as a necklace. He gained control over his followers about the same way that Jim Jones did. He felt the need to isolate them from the evils of the outside world, and he forced the group into the Canadian wilderness, starving and forcing them to perform a massive amount of physical labor to build a homestead. This resulted in a lack of free will for his followers, who were so physically and emotionally exhausted they became complacent even when Theriot was at his worst and most abusive. The children were abused as much as the adults. They said he abused the children of his followers and also his own children. He performed a circumcision on one of his sons and left the other to freeze to death outside. He forced children to watch and participate in sexual abuse with himself and with other adults and each other. He would get angry at a small baby for crying and torture them into stopping. Children were routinely nailed to trees as punishment. Even after the social workers had removed the children from his care and he was psychologically evaluated, he continued to convince psychologists that he was normal. In fact, one of the psychologists who had clearly become enamored with him testified at trial and told the judge they felt the children should be returned. The judge, thank God, luckily saw through the manipulation and ordered the children to be permanently removed. Now, he claimed to have an abusive childhood, and that was the farthest thing from the truth. He said he was kicked out at the tender age of 14 and was regularly abused by his father. In reality, he lived with his parents until he was in his mid-20s, and by all accounts, he had a very normal childhood and adolescence. He was extremely intelligent, but he dropped out of school after about the 7th grade. Theriot always felt like he was smarter than those around him, and he was an exceptionally well-read person. He even learned English, a rare feat in his French-speaking area of Canada. It was around the time he developed a reputation for being a ladies' man. He prided himself on his ability to ensnare almost any woman he wanted, using his intelligence, good looks, and his self-proclaimed well-endowment to woo women. Now, the cult members' families had begged police for intervention, but it didn't help. Family members of the group begged and pleaded with the police to go investigate Theriot and the cult throughout the mid and late 80s. He convinced psychiatrists he was merely a member of a healthy and nature-focused commune and made decisions as a group. The evaluation found him to be normal, only vindicating his belief that he lorded power over all and could do whatever he wanted. When he was returned to the commune after the investigation, there were many changes. He took to drinking again and started abusing the members more and more, hitting, punching, kicking, urinating on, and having one's fingers or toes cut off became the new normal. They didn't start out as a violent cult. They started out as most any normal cult that you see. They started off doing good things. He led smoking cessation workshops within the church and was seen as a positive influence on those around him. Eventually, the relationships with the group became more personal, and members started hanging out at Giesel's house. Two things occurred simultaneously that shifted the group into cult status. Theriot hiked in the woods, during which he heard and saw God's presence, and the group's decision to quit their jobs and open up a bakery together. Eventually, it was decided they would live together, and their bakery would be called Anthill Kids. They also started wearing similar tunic-inspired outfits. Now, in the movie, you will see where he takes these women into town, and they sell their baked goods to stores, and they get paid for it. At first, the religious aspect of the cult was in line with the Seventh-day Adventist theology. As time passed, he instituted new beliefs and rules that were the start of his own religion. He called himself Moses and renamed each one of the women to more biblical-sounding names. He told his followers the end of the world would occur in February 79, and they would leave the earth together. No one was allowed to leave the group, and if any infractions occurred, such as not being enthusiastic enough about lovemaking or not making the dinner he wanted, he'd fly into a rage and punish the offender. He was eventually held accountable for his crimes. The commune life came to a crashing halt when Lovely escaped and sought help at a hospital. Once the authorities learned of the crimes, they descended upon the commune. Theriot and several members were charged with various crimes, including the murder of Solange Boulessard and the attack of Lovely. Theriot was sentenced to life in prison, was up for parole in 2002. Fortunately, the parole board denied his request, calling him an ongoing danger to society. He could have been paroled at a later date, but he was murdered by one of his own fellow inmates in 2011. This man was really weird, really sick, very depraved, was not only a psychopath, he was a sociopath. I thought it was very interesting that we talk about him. Please watch the movie if you get a chance. It's well worth it.
I'm glad you went into that level of detail, and I hope people really listened, because he was very like the shining example of a fairly successful psychopath. And I say fairly successful because he ended up eventually pushing the envelope so far during his vulnerable period that he was taken up. The point of this is to show that there are people out there just like this. And there are people just like this who are a lot smarter than he was. Lobachevsky called them essential psychopaths, or some people call them successful psychopaths. He displayed every characteristic out of the book. Successful ones, at any rate, tend to rise to high levels in organizations and governments. Historically speaking, we can see those sorts of personalities having risen to those levels. And they still exist today. Roughly 5 to 7% of the general population falls into that category. So for those out there with this normalcy bias that believe that all these things that are happening around us are just coincidences, all these things like the vaccine damage that Hal talked about at great length today on his show Behind the Woodshed from 3 to 5, and the fact that aluminum as an adjuvant, aluminum of all things, and how it actually works. You know, it took some folks quite a bit of research to actually discover what happens with that. And Hal displayed that quite well, and you need to catch the archive if you want to really get the details on that. But then you have all these other things going on. The spraying of the sky, some people call chemtrails, others call persistent contrails, but whatever you want to call it. There's something coming out of the sky that's raising the aluminum content of the soil all over the place, which has a deleterious effect not only on people as you breathe it in and it gets sucked into your brains, but also on the trees that you see if you've been paying attention. You see the trees starting to become denuded and dying and falling over. Several right here recently have just kicked over 2 perfectly healthy, previously anyway, cherry trees, and a little bit of a wind just fell over, and upon close examination the root system was gone. There was no remaining root system to hold them up, and they've been looking kind of poorly anyway, but that seems to be consistent with what people are seeing all over the world. It's not only that the trees are falling down from aluminumization, if I invent a word if you don't mind, but also they're being intentionally cut down. And they're being intentionally cut down all over the place, and seems to be mainly in urban areas such as London, and in engineering and technology website. London councils remove almost 50,000 trees in 5 years. And they talk about the fact that their canopy is vanishing as a result. And this article goes through all kinds of reported reasons why. And talk about disease and all these sorts of and infestations that are causing them to have these trees cut down. But one thing they do not talk about is the fact that 5G doesn't work so well in a heavily foliaged area. Another person who has picked up on this 5G connection talks about the 300-year-old trees that were chopped down in Stoke-on-Trent in November 2017. In Norwich, avenues of trees were chopped down in December 2017. Wadsworth Council chopped down 54 trees at Tooting Common September 17, saying they were a public threat. Wiltshire Council cut down trees in October 2017. In 2017, Cornwall cut down a mile-long stretch, while a regeneration scheme in Plymouth saw a further 60 trees chopped down in February, and due to be completed in 2020. In Cardiff, trees were cut down in December for flood defense, while one's chopped down in January in Leicester reported to be for a bicycle path. It's not confined to the UK. In places like France, 10,000 roadside trees were chopped down to allegedly improve road safety, and 42,000 removed from the Canal du Midi. The reasons given were they had a fungus that were brought over by U.S. soldiers during World War II. Talk about stretching. In Queensland, Australia, 1 million acres of trees were cut down in 1 year, from 2015 to 2016. This is clearly an agenda, because we know that trees block the beams from millimeter waves that 5G utilizes. And still, many people don't want to believe that that's the real reason. Even though Korea chopped down an ancient forest to showcase their 5G at their Winter Olympics, bragging of using 5G to shoot beams at wild boar, still the issues of trees is being ignored as a link to 5G. So what else do we need to know? Well, let's go over to this organization. It's called the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, the IEEE. And in an article just recently, 27 February of this year, they posed the question, 5G is in danger of being oversold. It says commercial services are years away, but even then 5G won't fulfill all of its promises. And it talks about, it describes 5G, but it does say this. Interestingly, meanwhile, in the United States, Verizon and AT&T are rolling out 5G networks, but not for phones. Instead, they're focused on the home broadband market, delivering what's known as fixed wireless service over 1 millimeter waves. Millimeter wave spectrum is freely available for 5G for a reason. It has terrible signal propagation. Any obstacle in a signal's path, including rain, trees, and people, can disrupt it. They say they're cheaper to deploy than fiber, which explains why Verizon will launch its first fixed wireless service in Sacramento, California later this year. Meanwhile, it has been testing its own 5G broadband service in Austin, Texas, Kalamazoo, Michigan, and South Bend, Indiana. So if you live in any of those areas, stand by because you're about to become bathed in millimeter tech, millimeter waves. What's the big deal? I actually ran into a little bit of a non-believer, I suppose, that these things are bad for you. And I can only point out the following things that we pointed out before. That Lloyd's of London Insurance won't cover smartphones, Wi-Fi, smart meters, cell phone towers, because they specifically exclude that in your policies. And that's not just Lloyd's of London. I have other links here that list two other insurance companies. And some of the statements, too, in some of the annual reports of some of these service providers also are interesting, and I'll share with you later. But here's a standard exclusion in an insurance policy. It says insurance does not apply to bodily injury, property damage, interestingly, or personal and advertising injury arising out of, resulting from, caused by, or contributed to by electromagnetic radiation, provided that such injury or damage results from or is contributed to by the pathological properties of electromagnetic radiation. Don't think I need to read any more than that, but you'll find that there are no insurance policies that do not have that exclusion. Why do insurance companies exclude things from their policies, Gigi's Boo?
So they don't have to pay you.
Because they've recognized that it is a known to them.
It's a known cause, and they don't want to pay for it.
Right. It's just like you'll find most life insurance policies have something called a no war clause. That if you happen to get called up in the military service during time of war and you get killed, they don't pay. That's why they have SGLI, Soldiers Group Life Insurance, to fill that gap. But in any case, to me, if that wasn't evidence enough, well, let's see. What else have I got here somewhere? Age-old declassified CIA investigations into the use of electromagnetic radiation, and the fact that they even admit that as of the 60s, there were over 500 scholarly studies regarding the damaging effects of electronic radio waves and super high frequencies. And the legal liability issues, the insurance industry already recognizes the potential risks of EMF and is protecting itself. Insurance companies do not cover health damage caused by wireless technologies. Interestingly, there's a case pending in Italy's Supreme Court right now. Actually, it's not pending. They actually have ruled on it and said that a man's brain tumor was caused by his cell phone. So apparently some sort of legal action going on in Italy with regard to that. The Superior Court for the District of Columbia said if the probability of carcinogenicity, hello, Hal, is low, but the magnitude of the potential harm is high, good public policy dictates that the risk should not be ignored. That came from a 2014 ruling out of the D.C. Superior Court. So insurance companies are well aware of the risk. AM Best reported, that's an insurance rating company, in 2013 that emerging technologies pose significant risks with possible long-tail losses. The risks associated with the long-term use of cell phones is unknown. However, what is known is the risk that cell tower workers face. Thermal effects include eye damage, sterility, and cognitive impairments. That came from AM Best. And these go on and on and on. Lloyd's of London in 2010 stated the danger with EMF is that, like asbestos, the exposure insurers face is underestimated and could grow exponentially and be with us for many years. Lloyd's refuses to cover claims linked with RF radiation. The Lloyd's Insurance Company, Electromagnetic Fields from Mobile Phones, Recent Developments, Emerging Risks Report from November 2010, 8 years ago. And they exclude coverage for illness for long-term exposure. I won't read all of that. A Swiss Re, over the last decade, the spread of wireless devices has accelerated enormously. This development has increased exposure. If a direct link to health effects were established, it would be open doors for new claims and could ultimately lead to large losses. That's what the insurance companies are talking about. And so when these people say, oh, there's nothing wrong with it, one particular guy in question was saying, oh, this is the same stuff people were talking about years ago when they were starting to electrify homes, and all the electricity flowing through the wires in your house would be damaging to you. Well, no, it apparently is not the same thing. Seems like an apples and oranges comparison. But it gets better than that. What the telecom industry doesn't tell you, it does tell its investors. Verizon, for example, one of its annual reports, 2014, December 2014. We are subject to a significant amount of litigation, which could require us to pay significant damages or settlements. Our wireless business also faces personal injury and consumer class action lawsuits related to alleged health effects of wireless phones or radio frequency transmitters, and class action lawsuits that challenge marketing practices and disclosures relating to alleged adverse health effects, blah, 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 blah. The same sort of thing comes from BlackBerry Limited, Vodafone, AT&T, China Mobile, General Communications, American Tower Corporation, Crown Castle International, Telefonica, America Mobile, T-Mobile, Nokia, Microsoft, Tesla, and here's the Supreme Court of Italy we talked about, the Swiss Re report, Lloyd's of London report, Canadian Prosurance report, Zurich Community Care report, Abu Dhabi report, Mutual of Enumclaw report, and it goes on and on and on and on. So guess what? It seems like we're the only ones that don't know what's going on with this. There's so much information about the 5G thing that I don't know. What is going on here, G? This is obviously well known. I mean, the research is out there. They even try to make it seem like it isn't. But the research has been out there. The CIA report revealed the fact that there were 500 studies as of the 60s that investigated the damaging effects of super high frequencies, and it named the frequency ranges and the whole shooting match. But we're supposed to believe that suddenly it's no longer an issue. Well, I don't know what to tell you. Okay, for example, I'm going to get kind of a little bit technical here, but at least in the United States, the parts of the band that are being considered for 5G services is like the 3.1 to 3.5 gigahertz and 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz. That doesn't seem like it's really, really high, but it's high enough to have fallen under the watchful eyes of the Office of the Surgeon General, the United States Army Medical Intelligence Office, and this what was apparently a very highly classified report that was declassified in 2003. And some of the highlights out of this 177-page report that I'll be happy to direct you to if you're interested in reading them, is that in the summary areas, the super high frequency electromagnetic oscillations may have potential use as a technique for altering human behavior. Soviet Union and other foreign literature sources contain over 500 studies devoted to the biological effect of super high frequency. In certain non-lethal exposures, definite behavioral changes have occurred. Now, check that. Certain non-lethal exposures, behavioral changes have occurred. On one occasion, when the generator was being tested, this is a report directly from a study. On one occasion, when the generator was being tested after its erection, a bird flew under the aerial wires just as it was pulsed. Now, remember now, the problem here is the pulsing of the digital signal. All right, and for those of you who've been around, so what were those phones we used to have? Nextel, yeah. Those of you who've been around the old Nextel phones, if you were close to a computer or a headset, like when we're talking, if you had to sit on the desk, you could actually hear the pulsing. Boo Boo, take over for a second.
Okay. The old Nextel phones, Gary and I really enjoyed using. Whole family did, because you could do the little beep, beep, beep at each other, and it would be really, really cool to get him. Everybody in the stores would turn around and look at you because they'd say, what is that? Then when they became really popular, everything began to get up a little higher. The price began to go up. It was one of those things that just got so outrageous you couldn't afford it. Then the next thing that I heard is all law enforcement, FBI, CIA, sheriff's departments, highway patrol, and all those had bought it out. They only have the two-way now on the frequency that Nextel had. And Nextel had a great frequency because if you were going out of the country, all you had to do was just tell them, and they'd give you international two-way, and you could talk, and it was absolutely amazing. My uncle went to Europe, and he did the international, and it sounded just like he was in the next room. And all these people that are doing this, and I know I'm a little off topic a little bit because Gary was talking about U-rays and all this, but I'm telling you, the reason that they don't talk so much about all these things is simply because they don't want you to know what's going to happen. They're killing us off, just like we talked about the chemtrails and the whole 9 yards on that. It's to control the population. That's what I was trying to get out.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
But you bring up a really important point because they took those frequencies and put them into their trunking systems for their communication systems. And not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, I've seen the first in the reports of police officers coming down with cancers from being exposed to that continuous trunking system that they have in their cars. So they're being exposed continuously because the trunking system is constantly sending data.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You're right.
So, I mean, it's all right there in front of your face if you want to see it. And
Hal said that correlates to the FEMA highway tree cleaning project.
Sure.
I reported on the yeah, that's true, Hal.
Sure it does. And they want to lie about it. they want to lie about what they're doing and why they're doing it.
Yeah, they do, and they actually think we're stupid.
Mm-hmm. Well, some of the results from one of the studies that was in the CIA report was the researcher described the psychomotor disturbances as a slowing of thought processes and psychomotor reactions from which the people recovered within a brief period, apparently without permanent damage. And that was for a low-level constant exposure. It also talks about since the 60s, the Soviets have been publishing reports on the effects of electromagnetic and magnetic fields on the central nervous system of animals. In a book prepared by U. Kolodov as a compilation of Soviet and Western work in the area of electromagnetic effects on the central nervous system, a large portion of the text directs itself to the subject of the changes in conditioned reflexes and sensitivity to light in birds, rabbits, and fish. The effects of ultra-high and super-high frequencies on the electrical activity of the rabbit brain is extensively discussed. A report on constant magnetic fields is also present. And even the UCLA Brain Information Service in Los Angeles has a bibliographic collection of information which is pertinent to this discussion. That service has compiled an extensive bibliographic list on the biological effects of electromagnetic fields, especially on the central nervous system. So I'm not going to read any more. I'll put all these links in the blogcaster. But don't believe for a minute when these people say that, well, we don't think there's any damage going on here.
Mm-hmm.
They know exactly what they're doing.
Exactly. They really do.
And so there's not many other conclusions you can arrive at other than the fact that this is intentional. It's doing intentional damage to which you have very little recourse. The insurance companies exclude it, but it also raises the question, if the insurance companies exclude it, then how do these companies and the regulators, their so-called political leadership, how do they protect themselves against liability? And if you can show that one should reasonably know that there is a distinct danger, then does that not make them personally liable?
Yes.
So is this the necessary remedy? It's a little bit like arm twisting. You know, if you guys think you want to do this, are you ready for the consequences? Because there are consequences. I don't know, Gigi's Boo. I was listening to Hal today. Go ahead.
I think somebody should be held accountable, even though that the insurance companies will put that clause in there that we don't do this, we don't do that. I think somebody has to be held accountable.
Well, they do. And the best way is to prevent it from happening to begin with, if that's possible. Now, we already know that FCC rules some of the rulemaking have determined that this is out of the hands of localities, that their rules supersede local or state regulations. That's a real issue that has to be dealt with. And is it easier to deal with that issue, or is it easier to approach this from a liability direction? I don't know. That's something that has to be discussed. It has to be dealt with, because this is near at hand. And you can imagine the ramifications of being bathed in millimeter length electromagnetic radiation in the form of 5G, pulsed 5G, and all the different things that can possibly be accomplished with this. They talk about smart cars and smart homes and smart businesses and smart buildings. We've seen this mantra before, this smart technology. It's not so smart for you, it's smart for them, but not so smart for you. But what about your RFID technology? How might that interface with this 5G and this whole push to push people into the RFID mode, where you're chipped and things you deal with are chipped? And can these chips be read at a distance? Well, perhaps they can in a 5G environment. And what's that mean? What's that mean to you as far as tracking you anywhere and everywhere? There are so many questions here beyond the issue of the damage to your health or the damage to the trees around. There's always already evidence that these millimeter waves are damaging to foliage. There's already that level of evidence. So it's a huge issue, and I think it's not too late in this one. It can be approached. It has to be approached from locality to locality. So there's no magic bullet here. It has to be approached from county to county. And recently, a lady did what I think was a marvelous job, making a public statement in Montgomery County, Maryland, at a zoning board meeting where they were discussing change the rule about allowing more cell phone towers within the neighborhoods. Of course, she was totally against it, and I highly recommend you listen to it, because she checked off the blocks on how you approach this kind of thing. And she laid out the framework for establishing her standing, and she established the fact that, or at least alluded to the fact that they're damaging, and to the fact that the insurance companies won't cover the damage, and also pointed out to the board members that they're the ones, as political people, that are supposed to be, their duty is to provide a safe and productive life for the people they represent, and not do things that can cause direct harm. So she hit all the high spots. Highly recommend you listen to it. It's only about 3 minutes long, but we'll include that also in the broadcaster. And that brings us to the end of the show, Gigi's Boo. What else do you have to say about this?
I just think it's all fascinating, but I really am glad everybody was here. Really want to tell you we enjoyed being here. Remember to always take the road less traveled, and I love you all big to my heart.
Yeah, we appreciate you being here, and sorry about that interruption midway. We had a little bit of a cross signals going on here. But anyway, take care, and please do check out reallibertymedia.com and especially freedomsnetwork.com and help those guys out. And we look forward to seeing you next time here on The Road Less Traveled. Take care.